الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Oh ya Allah, make this a beneficial session to all of us. Let us get closer to you by understanding you better, by making effort to purify our hearts so that we can get the benefit of all of these things that teaches us about getting to know your Sifat better. Warda, I see you've joined us. Can you make the opening dua for us?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to everyone. Tonight, inshallah, we're going to start with a new category of the Sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm immediately going to go over to the first slide. Now, as we can see from the heading, that it's the 7 affirmative, conceptual, qualitative attributes. A long description can sound technical, but we'll explain it as we go along. There are 7 of them, and we will quickly go through the 4 categories. The 20 Sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A Sifat is a description. It's something that describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we say the attributes, these are the various ways that Allah has described himself to us. And there are 20 of them. And the 20 Sifat are divided into 4 different categories. The very first category deals only with the Dhat, the essence, the divine being itself. And it's referred to as Sifatul Nafsiyah. It refers to the self, the divine being. And there's only one in this category. And that in essence says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. The second category has 5 attributes. It's called Sifatul Salbiyah, or as we've translated it in English, it's the negating attributes. In other words, those things which can never apply to Allah, which are unbefitting to describe Allah with. In other words, beginning or end or similarity to anything, reliance or dependence, and that Allah has no partner or equal. Allah is one. Those are the 5 referred to as the negating attributes. We've been through these before, so I'm not going to say anything more now. Then we have the third category, and there are 7 of them. Now, if we take one, Sifatul Nafsiyah, Nafsiyah is 1, Salbiyah is 5, that's 6. Then there is another 7. 6 plus 7 is 13. Now, the 7, we have dealt with the last one. last week, which was speech. And the 7, if we remember, we started off with life, power, will, knowledge, sight, hearing, and speech. Now tonight we're coming to the 4th category, and that is the Sifatul Ma'anawiyah. It's also 7. It's affirmative qualitative attributes. Now, don't be put off by the terminology, but this is the way it's being described in most of the Tawhid literature. Now, the 7 that we're going to be dealing with tonight are in fact paired with the previous 7: life, power, will, knowledge, sight, hearing, and speech. And although they might appear to be the same, they are different. But not only are they different, they form a separate category that makes up the 20 Sifaat. And as we know, we have to know the 20 Sifaat. It's essential for us to know that. Now, the affirmative attributes are active and operational. They're not descriptive like the Sifatul Ma'ani. It says Allah has power, Allah has sight, Allah has hearing. But these are the same Sifat, but actually in operation. Now, if we take the 7 that we're going to be dealing with tonight, that in fact closes the 20 Sifat. If we add it up, 1 plus 5 plus 7 plus 7 gives us 20. And that signifies the perfection of what we ought to know as human beings about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the affirmative attributes we said are living, willing, all powerful, all knowing, all seeing, all hearing, and speaking. Now, this is a new category, yet it sounds very much like what we've dealt with previously. Let me just show you again what the previous slide said. The previous Sifatul Ma'ani said life, power, will, knowledge, sight, hearing, and speech. Now, what is the difference now between what we are going to be doing now is life and living. Is it the same? Life is a noun. Living is a verb. It's an action. Now, when we talk about the Sifat in this instance, the affirmative attribute or Sifat is living. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we say, does not only have life, Allah is living. And Allah's living is manifest, it's reflected in Allah's ever-presence in everything in creation. So Allah is living, Allah is ever-present, and Allah is never absent. Then will. Will is Allah's right to determine things. Allah has that quality, that ability. But Allah does not only have the quality, Allah is in fact exercising that will continuously. Because nothing in creation, we said, can exist if it is not the will of Allah. Can anything happen which is not the will of Allah? We've been through this before. Nothing can happen. It would mean, if we say something can happen and it's not the will of Allah, it would mean things can happen which is outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's control, which means Allah is not the governor, the ruler, the sustainer of this entire creation. So nothing can ever happen if it's not the will of Allah. this thing about the will of Allah, inshallah, when we get to it, to the decree and predestination, qada and qadr, then we will explain. But it's not an easy concept to understand if we take that Allah wills and nothing can happen if it's not the will of Allah. Does it mean that even the bad happens? Even it means the wrong that we do is the will of Allah? We'll deal with those kinds of questions when we get to the topic of qada and qadr. Now, if nothing can exist or happen if it's not the will of Allah, then it thus means that the will is permanently in operation. And it's not activated when certain conditions are met. For example, if it is, say you make dua, oh ya Allah, give me this job. You make a dua. Allah must give you a job. You make a plea. Now Allah will that you get the job or you don't get the job. You are appealing to Allah. Now the will must not be understood that the will only applies once you make the dua. The will is continuously applicable, and Allah has predetermined whatever it is that Allah wants to happen. The will of Allah is not triggered by you making dua. Very difficult concept to understand, but the will is permanently in operation. It never waits for anything to happen, because waiting is a sign of need or reliance or dependence. Then we come to power. Power is not only energy, as we've discussed before. That's one aspect of how we understand when we talk about power, the sifaat of power. It has to do with energy, but it also has to do with ability. So when we talk about Allah is all powerful, then Allah has all the power, but Allah is also all able to do whatever Allah wishes. Now, this power of Allah is not, it's not latent. I couldn't find a simpler expression to explain, or dormant. It's not resting and waiting to be triggered. It is continuously active in whatever form of existence we can think of. Whatever is in creation, Allah's power is applicable and active at all levels. It's not you want to switch on the light. A literal example now of energy. When you switch on the light, the energy that comes from the power station is activated. It switches on the light. Allah's power is not something that is reliant on a switch that needs to be pressed. Now the power is there. Or you make dua, then Allah allows this to happen or that to happen. It doesn't wait on anything to happen. It is permanently present. It's never absent. And every single thing in creation, its existence, its behavior, whatever happens to it is dependent on the sifaat of all-powerful. So it is an active thing, and it's never absent. It's always operative. Now, you might say, okay, we'll come to that later. Let me deal with the other ones immediately. When we talk about knowledge, knowledge is part of the previous 7. This sifaat is known as all-knowing. It's one of the affirmative ones. So that's why we are saying it's paired. Knowledge is paired with all-knowing. Now, as we've explained, Allah is not dependent on time. Therefore, something need not happen first for Allah to know it. Allah knows the past, the present, and the future, and no new knowledge can ever be added to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows. But it doesn't mean that the knowledge is just sitting there that Allah knows. Allah's knowledge and awareness and consciousness of everything permanently. It's not something that's waiting for an event to happen or to be triggered. Allah is already conscious and aware and watching over whatever it is happening. In the same way, many of it might sound like it's similar, and yes, it is similar because we are talking about Allah. So we're talking about Allah has sight. Allah is also all-seeing. Now, we know that there are many things that prevents us from seeing. We might have sight, but there are things that prevents us from seeing. But Allah sees continuously. Nothing ever blocks it or prevents it, prevents Allah from seeing everything. Now, like we said, Allah knows everything, what is known and unknown to us, past, present, and future. In the same way, Allah witnesses and observes everything that happens throughout the existence of creation, past, present, and future. Allah is seeing. Allah was all seeing and all knowing and all the other things that we've mentioned previously before we even came into existence. Now, let me just make a point here, and that is, if Allah was not all seeing and all knowing before existence started, then it would mean that only after existence started, then Allah saw, which means that existence triggered the ability for Allah to see. And that would be a weakness. Then Allah would be dependent on existence coming into being, and only then Allah could see. No. Then the Sifaat is waiting to be triggered before Allah can see. I hope the point is clear. In the same way, Allah has the ability to hear, but Allah is in fact hearing. It's never inactive. It's never not operational. The Sifaat is continuously operational. And in the same way that sight doesn't require a trigger, hearing also doesn't require a trigger. There isn't a need for a sound to be generated first before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can hear. And in the same way, also time never applies because Allah is the creator of time. So Allah hears everything from the beginning till the end of time, and was hearing before we even came into existence. Speaking. Allah has speech, but Allah is speaking. It's not like, if we use the example of what we did last week, we did the Sifaat of Al-Kalam, where Allah spoke to Nabi Musa. Allah says in the Quran, Allah spoke to Nabi Musa at a certain time. Does it mean that Allah was not speaking? Then at that time, when Allah, that Allah refers to, spoke to Nabi Musa, that Allah only spoke then and waited on the time to arrive before Allah spoke to Nabi Musa? We must be careful how we understand that, because now we're applying time to Allah. We can apply time to Nabi Musa because he is a human being. He's made of flesh and blood. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, time never applies to Allah. So Allah speaking is not dependent on time or the appearance of Nabi Musa at a certain time for Allah to speak to him. Allah is never silent, because if we'll speak about the proof of that as we move on. Now, yes, if we look at, let me just show you again. We said life, living, will, willing, power, all powerful, knowledge, all knowing, sight, all seeing, hearing, all hearing, speech and speaking. It sounds like it's the same. So why is it then necessary for us to know them all? We can understand the first part, and we dealt with it in detail. Why is it that it's essential for us to know the affirmative ones equally? Because although they may appear to be similar or a duplication of the previous 7 sifat, they are considered to be completely different and separate. Now, the example that I'm going to use compares a human being who has sight. We're going to just use one example. Human beings have sight. We know they can see. Those that Allah blessed with the ability to see. They have sight and they can see. It's possible for them to see. But they can only see when certain conditions are met. They can't see if their eyes are closed, or there's absolute darkness, or something is invisible. They might have the ability to see under normal circumstances. But say, for example, a person is unconscious or he is sleeping. He might have the ability to normally see or the ability of sight. But at that particular moment, that person is not seeing if he's unconscious or asleep. Don't use the example of, yeah, in your sleep, you can also see. In that instance, you are not seeing with your eyes, you are seeing as a manifestation of what is happening in the brain. So clearly, human sight has very definite limitations and pre-requirements before it becomes operational. And here we can see there's a different, the same person who is not able to see when he or she is asleep has sight, but must wake up first. Or if somebody closes your eyes with whatever dark object, they put it in front of your eyes and you can't see. It doesn't mean you don't have sight. You can't see, but you still have sight. I hope that point is clear, because if you don't understand this, you will battle to understand what is the difference between sight and actually seeing. Sounds a bit technical, yes, I know, but we're going to open the floor and maybe you can ask questions when we get to open time. So if you use that example and you of human sight, and we compare to divine sight, we said Allah has sight. We covered that as one of the previous sifat. But Allah is also seeing everything all the time without there having to be a trigger or something happening first before Allah can see it. and Allah's sight is continuous, there's never a point where it stops or where it ends. It is continuous. It's uninterrupted. Like all the other sifat, Allah sees continuously without interruption. It doesn't start at a certain point and then it stops, then it starts again when something happens. Allah sees continuously, which shows us that sight is something that one can possess, like a human being can possess sight, but it doesn't mean that they're actually seeing. Whereas it's totally different with Allah. Allah has sight, but Allah is also seeing, not just sometime, but all the time and everything. So if we were to summarize the 7 affirmative attributes, then we can say they are all the previous conceptual attributes in action. Sight, seeing is a verb. Life is a noun, living is a verb. So it is an action. It's an attribute, an active operational activity that's associated with all of these attributes, although they are paired and look similar to the previous 7. And we have no choice. As believers, we know that the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are obligated. As Muslims, we have absolutely no choice. It's wajib. Wajib, it means that if you don't do it, you're going to be punished. You must make effort to know the 20 sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This comes before all the other sciences. It doesn't matter what aspect of the deen you are talking about. Knowing the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the subject of Tawhid comes first. Otherwise, whatever follows now, you are following blindly or you're believing blindly. And therefore, it is essential for us to know and understand. If it is that we're coming across these sifat that look so similar, we must understand why they are similar and not saying, yeah, it's the same thing. It's not the same, and you must know why it's not the same and be able to explain it to yourself, if to no one else. I'm just going to pause quickly there and hear if there are any questions or comments that anyone wish to make now. The floor is open. Any questions? No questions. All right. I will go on then, inshallah. So we have no choice. We must learn to understand the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no compromise on this. Now, all these 7 attributes, the affirmative attributes, they affirm, they validate the previous 7 attributes. What do we have here? Somebody is
أجي تعرفون مستورة أجي ها
they I apologize for that interruption. The affirmative attributes are not triggered by any requirement. They exist permanently, whether there's existence or not existence. And nothing has to be met first. There is no condition that is applicable to any of these sifat that we are mentioned. I have mentioned. They are continuously active and operational before, after, or during the existence of creation. Now, just something that, why are we making this point and what is the proof of the statement? If there was a point where any of these affirmative conceptual attributes were either dormant or resting, or inactive or not operational at any point, let's take, for example, sight. Say something needs to be visible first, or that time must first arrive before Allah can speak to Nabi Musa and see him, then it would mean that Allah is not seeing Nabi Musa until that point when they meet, however they meet. Then only. That would mean that the sifat of sight has to be triggered by something that happens in creation. I hope we're clear about this. Let's not take the sight thing. Let's take the sound thing and say that this absolute silence, then a sound is generated. Somebody drops something on the floor and it makes a loud bang or noise. If Allah would only hear then it means that when that thing drops on the floor, that triggers Allah's ability to hear. Allah forgives us for even using an example like that. So never ever does any of the sifats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to be triggered by event first, then it becomes operational. Because that would suggest that there is a reliance or dependence or a need from creation to do something or for something to happen before the sifat becomes effective or operational. And that would clearly mean that Allah is imperfect then, because then Allah is not absolutely perfect. Allah is dependent on something else, whatever that might be. So that would be the proof that these attributes are permanently operational and permanently active. There's never a point where it rests or stops or starts. Equally, yeah, this point I made now. It's not only one attribute, but all the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no beginning and no end. Anything that has a beginning, what does that mean? The quick answer would be it's creation. But what is the other logical part of it is anything that has a beginning means it didn't exist before it began. Logical, very logical. And if it didn't exist before it began, then it means something had to bring it into existence. And it needed a trigger for it to begin, whether it is life or an action or whatever. So every attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only the 7, but everything that belongs to Allah, that Allah is being described with, can never have a beginning or never have an end. Now, the 5 negating attributes which we dealt with, the 5 negating attributes which we dealt with right at the beginning, that Allah has no beginning, no end, Allah is dissimilar to creation, not reliant, and Allah is one. All of those negating attributes, unbefitting attributes, beginning, end, similarity, reliance, and so on, applies to all Allah's sifats. Although they separate sifat, but they also in the same way apply to every sifat. It can't have beginning and end, and it's never similar to anything that is in creation. The moment you say it is like that in creation, then no, it is not. If you want to draw a comparison between anything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anything and anything in creation, the moment you draw a similarity between the two, then know that you are wrong. Because Allah is dissimilar to anything in creation. Unlike, Allah is never comparable to anything that we can think of. And Allah's abilities and qualities can never be compared to anything that we can think of. Similar maybe in a way to describe it. For us to understand, we could say it's like this, it's like that, but there is no actual similarity. Allah is unlike and dissimilar to anything in creation. Subhanallah. How these attributes work. Now you're going to say, now how is it possible for the people who want to now use logic and want to examine these things now using only logic? They're going to say, now how is it possible for Allah to see something which is not there? It's a reasonable question if you were to speak to a non-believer. How these attributes work, how Allah works, how Allah sees without eyes, how Allah speaks without a voice or a tongue, can never be explained. Allah's perfection, Allah's greatness is such that our minds are totally incapable of understanding utter and total perfection. That's why only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself can understand himself and describe himself in total and describe how these things work to himself, but none other in creation is capable of truly knowing the essence of Allah and how things actually work. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a reason as to why Allah did this or why Allah did that. But why Allah does things or how things are done are not things that we should spend time on, because there is no answer to that. There is absolutely no answer from anyone or anything when it comes to some of the questions like why and how. Now, we've come to the end. I'm not going to go into more detail on these 7 affirmative conceptual attributes. I'm going to quickly touch on there's 20 sifat that's wajib for us to know, that are essential in the way that we describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we've done the 20 now. Alhamdulillah. There's a lot more to say, there's a lot more to know, because we're talking about Allah. And no one, no matter who they are, can know everything about the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one. Because you're talking about Allah. Allah. You're talking about Allah. Only Allah can know Allah. So when we talk about Tawhid, this is a subject that goes on and on and on and on and on. And it doesn't matter how long you live, you'll never be able to know everything there is to know about Tawhid. Because Tawhid covers the subject of knowing Allah. Allah, the description and the Sifaat and the qualities of Allah. But there are 20 things that the scholars have felt are equally important to know. And that is to understand that there are certain things that can never ever be applied to Allah. You're going to say, but didn't we cover that in the negating attributes? In a sense, yes, some of it were covered, but they've separated that from the 20 that is, and it's referred to as mustahil, impossible. 20 sifat that are impossible. Now, I'm not going to spend time on this because they are actually just the opposite. Those first 20 that we dealt with were absolutely essential. It was wajib for us to know that. They must be there, not only for us to know it, but it's wajib for Allah to be described with those 20. Now, the opposite of that is not possible. Now, if you look at just the example, you say the first sifat is wujud. Allah exists. Allah has no beginning. Allah has no end. Allah has no similarity. Allah has no dependence, and Allah is one. Now, you can never say that Allah, opposite now of that would be that Allah is non-existent. That's impossible. For Allah to have a beginning, that's impossible. For Allah to have an end is impossible. For Allah to be similar to anything is impossible. For Allah to be dependent, in need, or reliant on anything is impossible, mustahil. For there to be more than one Allah, to Allah to have a partner, is also impossible. Then we came to the other sifat, power. So it's impossible for Allah to be unable, to have inability, or to be powerless. It's impossible for Allah not to have a will. The ability to determine things in creation comes from the divine will of Allah. So it's never an occasion ever where any of this will apply. There's never a point where Allah is unable to do anything. There's never a point where Allah does not have will over anything at any point or any time, over anything in the entire creation. Allah can never be described with ignorance, even if it is a minor thing. We're not talking ignorance. We think it's a person who is generally not knowledgeable. That's the broad, we refer to a person as that's an ignorant person. But ignorance means that there is something, you can be ignorant about one thing and know everything else. There's never anything that Allah is ignorant about. Allah cannot be described with ignorance in the broad sense or in the particular sense. This speaks for itself. Allah can never die. So we said power, will, knowledge, life. Allah must also always exist. There can never be a point where Allah dies. If Allah dies, then it means that Allah, if Allah doesn't have life, then it means that Allah is non-existent. If Allah is non-existent, then nothing else can exist. The whole matter ceases to be in its entirety, because everything depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we said knowledge, life, hearing. It's impossible. This is the, remember what's the top 20 attributes why impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah can never be described with being deaf, ever, or blind, or mute. In other words, inability to speak. So that's all that I'm going to do, because in a sense, many of these attributes which are impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we've touched on when we dealt with the actual first 20 sifat. That's wajib to know. And these are the 20 attributes which are impossible, but they are also wajib to know. Then there is a last sifat which I didn't even put up, and that is this 20 sifat that are essential to describe Allah, and 20 which can never be applied to Allah. And there is one sifat that it is possible for Allah to do whatever Allah wishes to do, as long as you are not talking about that which is impossible. That's why the impossible is important, because, for example, a question can come: if Allah can do anything, if Allah can do anything, can Allah create another Allah? Okay, let me put that question. Can Allah create another Allah? I'm putting that open to the floor. I want to hear. Allah can do anything. Allah has power over everything. Allah is the creator of everything. Can Allah create another Allah?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Another Allah cannot be created, because it means that the second one would be deficient, absent, and able to start and to end.
Yes, very good. And also, apart from that, if that person, if that Allah was created, a second Allah was created, it would conflict with the oneness of Allah. So can you describe Allah? Is described with 20 sifat, one of which is the oneness of Allah. Allah does not have partners. So can that second one ever come into existence? No. And it will conflict with other things. One of the other things would be, if Allah created another Allah, and both Allahs decide, the one decides it must rain and the other Allah decides no, the sun must shine, it mustn't rain, then whose will take precedence? The wills will clash. Either nothing will happen, or there will be utter chaos. So those are things, there are certain things that is not, it's not possible for it to happen if it conflicts with any of the 20 wajib sifat, or the 20 which are impossible for Allah. Where's this? We said 20 attributes which are impossible. It's impossible for Allah to be described with that. Multiplicity. Multiplicity. Multi meaning more than one. Allah is one. Allah is not, cannot be described with dependence or being more than one. So if you ask the question, can Allah create another Allah? Go back to the sifat and your answers will be there. Okay. We've come to the end, alhamdulillah. As far as in my weakness, I've tried to go into a bit more detail about explaining the 20 Sifaat so that we can actually know it a bit better. But the test is going to come of how we apply it in our own lives. Now, I was going to go on to Qada and Qadr, but I've decided that I am going to do another series of the purification of the heart. And that it's not such heavy stuff, if I can call it that. It's going to be more relevant, more practical, and things that can assist us to become better Muslims, but using the information that we've covered up to now. We take the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we apply it in our daily conduct and our daily behavior. That's the next session that we are going to do. Then after that, if time allows, inshallah, then we will go on to Qada and Qadr, because we must do that. So alhamdulillah, we've reached the end of what was a long series of sessions that we dealt with, but we are now going to go over to a completely new area, inshallah. Let me just find out if there are any final comments or questions, not only about what we've dealt with tonight, but also what we've dealt with previously and the whole question of Tawhid. And maybe one or two comments whether it has assisted people. And I don't want praise, please. I'm not finding a clever way of getting you to praise me. All I want to know whether it's truly been of use to you, whether you've benefited out of this, and whether you believe that, you know, that you understand some of the sifat of Allah a bit better. And in the process, inshallah, Allah will make that a reason of how you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let me just leave it like that and just hear the last few comments before we close. Let's hear. Sister Amina, I know you didn't sit through all of the lectures, and you were overseas for a while as well, I know. But how have you found it, even though you didn't come in right at the beginning? Okay. I shouldn't be putting people on the spot like that. All right. I hope, inshallah, that we've all benefited and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it even more so in the way that we are able to take the information and apply it in our own lives. I'm going to ask Sister Warda to do the closing dua for us.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Oh Allah, accept from us what we attempting to learn, and may Allah grant barakah in the knowledge and show us how to apply it, and reward abundantly to those who are, especially the one who is doing the transmission of the knowledge. Ameen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Shukran.
Shukran, Sister Warda. I just do want to say the obligation now is on all of us, and I include myself. How do we take this knowledge now, and how do we put it into practice? because knowing Allah better doesn't benefit Allah. It's supposed to benefit us. And the way it should benefit us is how we practice it in our own life. And please make time to go through what we've already dealt with, especially if there are areas that you don't understand and we did cover it. Make time to go over it. Inshallah, may Allah be pleased with all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our families, our friends, the ummah, and relieve the people who are going through difficulty wherever they might be in our country or anywhere else. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.